Hello, lovely people, and welcome back to another sort of book chat. Not my normal book chat, but it is a book chat. There's chatting and it is about a book. So, as most of you probably know, Beaufort's seventh cozy mystery with dragons, obviously, and also Mysterious Beast, is out tomorrow, and that's Beast Laid Plans. So, I thought I would do a little bit of reading aloud since I'm so terribly good at it, and hopefully I won't get rained on. Um, I'm videoing this while still in New Zealand, even though when you see it, I will no longer be in New Zealand because that is just how this year is going. I'll be in Australia. Um, and yes, it's still quite cool. Looks like it's going to rain, and I'm currently getting a wet bum from sitting on the deck, and I should have put something down, or I don't know, used a chair. People use those things. Not me so much. Anyway, Beast Laid Plans. I have borrowed a tablet to do this so I can do it in colour, but I'm having difficulty driving it because I'm no good with tablets. Oops, there she is. Beast Laid Plans, out tomorrow in ebook and soon after that in paperback. So, if you've been following the newsletters, social media, or if you're on the blog, you'll know that the first two chapters are up there and you can nip over and read both of them anytime you fancy. So you can get a little bit of a taste of what Beast Laid Plans is like. But I thought, let's do another snippet. So I'm going to read you chapter 3 and try not to trip over my words too much or get rained on. We'll see how that goes. So, chapter 3, Beast Laid Plans. Miriam. It had been such a lovely day, Miriam thought mournfully. She had sat in her garden with a cup of tea as the sun painted long dawn shadows across the grass, her bare feet wet with dew and the birds shouting deliriously in the trees, smelling damp wood and fresh earth and the sweet high scent of the brook that ran along the bottom of her garden, part of the network of waterways that embroidered Toot Hansel onto the landscape of the Yorkshire Dales like a jewel onto some beautiful multicoloured dress. She'd been thinking that it was a good day for doing laundry, but also far too nice to waste actually doing it, and had been considering making a picnic instead, and seeing if Alice wanted to walk into the woods in the direction of the Dragon's Mount to find a nice spot to have it. They'd never actually been to the Dragon's Mount, she would never presume to ask if they could, but that part of the woods always felt more alive with magic than any other, full of half-glimpsed things and the sense that one was being observed by quick, clever eyes, there and gone again in a breath. Plus, it made her feel closer to the dragons, which eased the vague, persistent sense of loss that had settled on her with it being such a terribly long time since they'd seen each other. So yes, maybe she and Alice could find a nice place along the stream and paddle, or even swim if the day was hot enough. She thought it might be. Although, if she were honest, she couldn't actually imagine Alice swimming. Not in the splashing in the stream sense. Doing steady lengths of some vast and abandoned pool, perhaps, her arms moving like a metronome, but not splashing. Not that it mattered. Miriam could splash, and Alice could be dignified on the bank, perhaps. They could even ask Jasmine if she wanted to come, but not Teresa, who was far too fit and whose legs were far too long for pottering along the river. She had walked there and back before Miriam got out of the village. No, it would be better if it was just her and Alice, and maybe Jasmine, because any more it'd be a whole Toot Hansel Women's Institute outing, and that felt like a lot. Not that Miriam didn't love every single one of them, but some days were too large and beautiful to be drowned out by voices. Some days had to be allowed to just be, and one enjoyed them best by allowing oneself to drift with them, rather than giving them over to too much talk and socialness. Author's side note, I really relate to Miriam sometimes. um, anyway, of course, all these plans would have been much better with dragons. Everything was better with dragons, but some things couldn't be helped. Not seeing Mortimer and Beaufort, or even Amelia and Gilbert and grumpy old Walter, made the days seem a little dimmer, the summer sun a little less bright, but the alternative was that the dragons risked being seen by a lurking journalist. That was just courting disaster, and not at all worth the risk. One day it would all go back to as it was, and in the meantime there was no point resenting the days without dragons. One had so few days in the end, so one must just find the magic in the everyday as well as in the truly magical. So Miriam had sat there on her aging garden bench with the cracked slat that pinched the back of her legs if she sat in the wrong spot, cradling her tea in her hands and considering picnics, and thinking that it was going to be a most beautiful day. And she supposed now it still was, but she was feeling rather less inclined to notice it. Even if she was sitting in Alice's very tidy and well-trimmed garden on a comfortable wooden chair with plump blue cushions, with her bare feet nestling into the soft grass and an umbrella mushrooming out of the table to protect them from the sun. The birds were still singing, the bees rumbling in the heat, and there was cake and tea and neatly folded napkins in front of her. It was all very nice, but she was no longer sure she was having a nice day at all. She took a sip of tea and looked from Alice to Rose, who both looked back at her expectantly. She would have liked it if they'd looked a little guilty at ruining her beautiful day, but it wasn't in their natures, she supposed. Well, Rose asked. Her hair was dyed orange this week, and the sun lent it neon tones as she tapped the grimy newspaper lying on Alice's garden table between them. What do you think? I was going to suggest a picnic, Miriam said. Maybe a paddle in the stream. How nice, Alice said, as if a small child had showed her a finger painting. She tucked silver hair behind one ear and turned the paper to face her, examining the photo carefully. Do you think it could be fake, Rose? It's hard to tell from the photo, Rose said, but whether it is or not, the fact remains that they're still talking about, writing about, dragons in Yorkshire and Toot Hansel specifically. They just don't give up, do they? Miriam peered at the byline on the article. Catherine Llewellyn, she read aloud. She really is very annoying. I'd admire her persistence if she wasn't so fixated on the dragons, Alice said. It's not even a story about Toot Hansel, and she still mentioned us. Persistent wasn't the word Miriam would have used for Catherine. She had some rather choicer ones, although she supposed it wasn't quite fair. The woman was just doing her job, but her job seemed to be very centred around proving dragons existed in general, and in Toot Hansel in particular, and she was the reason the dragons had been banished from the village, which meant that Miriam didn't feel much like being fair about her. Have you heard of this beast of Yorkshire? Alice asked Rose. Is it some sort of local legend? I thought I'd read up on most of them, but every village seems to have its own ones. Rose nodded. Oh, they do. The beast could be anything, really. It could be another name for the Yorkshire panther, or it could be a black dog of sorts, or it could be complete twaddle. I thought the Yorkshire panther was usually only seen after pub closing time, Miriam said, more to herself than the others. Or in the fevered imagination of cryptid journalists, Alice said. But the issue is, of course, that it's all drawing more attention our way. Here, but this is 2 valleys over, Miriam protested. Catherine never found any evidence, and neither did anyone else. Surely they won't bother. They're still mentioning us, Rose said. The main attention's over there right now, sure, but as long as our name's floating about, there'll be people coming here to look for dragons. Especially if they don't find anything on the beast, we'll end up turning into a bloody hot spot. This is awful, Miriam said. We're never going to be able to go back to normal, and we haven't seen the dragons in Sydney forever. How long are we going to have to keep this up? Alice smiled at her. It really is most irritating, but we can't risk anyone getting a whiff of them. The whole situation with Catherine was far too close for comfort. It was horrifying, Miriam said. Catherine had even seen Mortimer once, trapping him on Miriam's own kitchen step while the journalist was snooping about the place with her photographer friend. Trespassing was what it was. The journalists, not the dragons, obviously. The dragons had more right to her garden than she did when it came down to it. They'd been here longer. Well, I've been keeping tabs on this lot, Rose said, tapping the paper again. On the forums and chatting to some people, My contacts say Catherine's definitely still stuck on the dragons and Toot Hansel angle, so I wonder if she's hoping to draw them out with this beast stuff. But they won't know, Miriam said. If we don't tell them, they can't know, can they? Alice tapped her fingers on her cup. One would hope not, but who knows what networks they have. They might know more than us. Perhaps we should try and get a message to them. We can't, Miriam said. It's too risky. Never mind getting anyone to take a message. If we tell them, they have to be even more careful because that same journalist poking about making up stories about beasts and linking them to Toot Hansel, they'll want to get involved and prove there is no beast and hope that she goes away. And if she really is trying to draw them out, then they'll be playing right into her hands. You're quite right, of course, Alice said. And the next thing you know, they'll be wandering around in dog disguises again, and they were never very good even when people weren't looking for dragons. Miriam shuddered, thinking of the very first Christmas market they'd shared with the dragons. Beaufort had been very proud of the dog costumes they'd come up with, and it was true that in the dark and firelight, when no one was expecting dragons, they had worked to a point. That point being when Beaufort had an unfortunate allergic reaction to an actual dog and had set fire to his costume. Miriam had thought that a flaming dragon in the middle of a winter fete would be impossible for people to forget, but it turned out that photography doesn't really work on magical folk, and also that people are more inclined to think they've had some dodgy mulled wine than to have actually seen a dragon. We can't tell them, she said. They've been hiding away for weeks and weeks now, and Beaufort will be getting bored. He'll definitely use this as an excuse to get involved, and you know he won't sit to sense once he's decided. It's very hard to stop a dragon doing what they want, Rose said. It took ages to convince Walter to stop coming by all the time to check my garden for lurking men after the whole duel debacle. She considered it. I think I'm rather done with men, though. Such a hassle. Campbell was nice, Alice said, in an encouraging tone that suggested she felt it was something she ought to say rather than anything she particularly agreed with. Far too nice, Rose agreed. He's been unbearable since the body in the freezer. He keeps wanting to be helpful and to do things for me like I can't do them myself. I had to break it off. I can always call Jean-Claude if I really need some male company. Excuse me, Miriam said. Can we go back to the problem of the journalists and the dragons? What are we going to do? There was a moment's silence, then Alice picked up a plate of homemade hobnobs, their tops spackled with chocolate, and offered them to Miriam. Well, we should certainly do something, she said. Miriam looked at her suspiciously. Such as call D.I. Adams, maybe? I'm not sure that would help, Alice said, putting the plate down untouched. No one's committed any crimes. Crimes against the scientific method, Rose suggested. Making all this fuss with no real evidence. It's shocking. I don't think you can be arrested for that, Alice said. You should be able to. It gives us few people who take the field seriously a bad name. Perhaps it could be for their own safety, Miriam suggested. Maybe this beast might eat them if they get too close to it. One can hope, Alice said. I still don't think the threat of that would be enough to convince D.I. Adams to arrest them, though. Walter said he'd eat a journalist if he spotted one, Rose said helpfully. There was a thoughtful pause while Miriam wondered if Walter had enough teeth to actually eat anyone, or if dragons, like snakes, could dislocate their jaws and swallow things much larger than seemed possible. She didn't like the thought of it, even if they were journalists. Walter eating one seems unlikely to help maintain our stance regarding the non-existence of dragons, Alice said finally. It'd give him something to do, Rose said. Do you know, I had to chase him out of the garden with the broom not long after we agreed they shouldn't come to the village. He insisted he was keeping men of ill repute at bay. I suppose he meant well, Miriam said. Rose sniffed. I told him I was rather hoping for a man of ill repute, and he was so put out he stomped right through my pond when he left. I'm sure it upset the goldfish. Miriam frowned. You have goldfish in that pond? Rose's garden was more wilderness and cultivation. She couldn't imagine goldfish surviving long in there. Well, I don't now. I think we should tell Colin, Miriam said. About the beast, I mean, not Walter. That's no different than telling D.I. Adams, Rose said. It is. Colin might be a detective inspector as well, but he never made her feel as if she'd inadvertently stolen something. Whenever Miriam was around D.I. Adams, she found herself checking her pockets, as if she might find an unexpected murder weapon in there somewhere. Of course, Colin being her nephew helped, but it wasn't just that. I rather doubt we've got enough information to bother either of the detectives at this point, Alice said, and they'll only tell us to leave it alone anyway. Miriam took a sip of tea to hide the slight twist in her mouth. So we just let the journalist carry on? Rose asked. It's going to lead right back to us, and the dragons will get wind of it at some point. It's no good. Quite, Alice said. Do you know, it occurs to me that one can be discredited even if one isn't arrested. If one was seen to be making things up for one's own ends. She trailed off, looking at the other two women expectantly. The journalists? Miriam asked. Do you think they would? Isn't that rather unethical? Rose snorted and slammed her cup down on the table. Have you seen this paper? They're selling crystals to cure baldness and serums made from the tears of mermaids. Ethical isn't in their style guide. It doesn't matter if they're doing it or not, Alice said. We just have to convince everyone else they are. Miriam looked at her for a long moment, then reached across the table and took a hobnob after all. She took a bite, trying to concentrate on nothing but the round, warm flavour of the spices and the soft chew of the oats, but she couldn't. All she could think of was that awful Catherine and her horrible, observant eyes, casting around the garden like she really was some sort of monster hunter of old. Really? Isn't there some other way we can deal with this? Us chasing after the journalists seems like it might make us look even more as if we're hiding things. We could set Walter on them, Rose said. Any sensible way to do it, I mean. We could just wait and hope for it all to die down, Alice said. But Miss Llewellyn doesn't seem to be the sort of person who would really let go of this. She did actually see Mortimer. She knows there are dragons here, and it's possible that she's thinking up ways to draw them out. They stayed hidden for centuries, Miriam said. They can wait her out. I'm sure they could, but that could take a terribly long time. Do we really want to risk never being able to see the dragons again? Miriam tried to imagine that and immediately popped the rest of the biscuit in her mouth. Even the thought of it made the world seem suddenly 3 shades darker and so terribly, dreadfully dull that she could barely stand it. No matter how much one knew there was magic to be found in every day, once one had had real magic in their life, it was hard to imagine giving it up forever. It was as if life took on the shades of the worst sort of damp winter days at the very idea. Those days when it's not raining or misty or anything, just cold and grey and flat and lifeless. If we had to, she managed in a small voice, if it kept them safe. And do you think they'd be happy with that? Alice asked. They'd die of scone deprivation, Rose declared, or tea withdrawal. They wouldn't stand for it. Alice nodded. And there'd be no use telling them they had to. One can't really tell Beaufort very much at all. Miriam looked at her tea, aware that the other women were waiting for her to say something. She wasn't sure why. She might have been the first in the village to befriend the dragons, the first in the world, perhaps, to have befriended a dragon for centuries. But that didn't mean she spoke for them. And she certainly wasn't some sort of authority on dragons, or indeed in the WI. She was just herself, sitting in the flood of summer sun that suddenly seemed less warm and less bright than it had a moment earlier. She thought of Mortimer, poor dear Mortimer, with his patchy tail from the stress shedding and his beautiful dragon scale creations, and how he loved curling on her hearth on winter days to watch TV, and who adored scones and mince pies in equal measure. And Beaufort, who was so terrifyingly interested in everything, but who also believed so firmly that every single one of them was so capable and smart and delightful, far more so than they ever believed in themselves. She let go of her cup and folded her fingers together on the table. So, what do we do then? Alice smiled at her. I think we go to Ellesmere to start with. Have a look around and see what we can learn. Then we can figure out how to move against the journalists. Miriam wrinkled her nose. Really? Straight there? What if we run into them? We have as much right to be there as anyone else, Alice said. They certainly can't chase us off. Besides, we'll have a cover story, Rose said. I've always taken an interest in the cryptozoology community. It makes perfect sense for me to be there, looking to debunk it all. And we should be your faithful research assistants, Alice said, smiling. Yes, perfect. That makes it easier for chatting to everyone there too. The community is naturally suspicious of anyone who doesn't believe in cryptids. They've been the butt of too many jokes over the years. Fancy that, Alice said. And you can stop that too if you're going to be my assistant. Alice chuckled, but Miriam gave Rose a dubious look. They were rather too old to be anyone's assistants, she thought, but who knew what the standards were for such things in the world of cryptozoology? Isn't it going to be really obvious that we're not part of the cryptozoology community? Rose shook her head and tapped her phone. I've been following all the forums. The village is attracting all sorts of attention already, and it's everyone. Serious researchers, weekend warriors, cryptid tourists. You'll pass easily as some friends of mine with enough interest to be supporting me in my research. No one's going to think twice about us asking a few questions. She looked from Miriam to Alice. We'll have to look the part at least a little bit, though. Miriam looked down at her tie-dyed sleeveless dress. It was a rather pleasing clash of purples and greens, and she'd chosen some gold flip-flops to go with it. I'm not sure I have anything that suits monster hunting, she said. Not you, Rose said. You look like just the sort of person who'd go flocking to monsters and alien sightings. She nodded at Alice while Miriam tried to decide if she was insulted or not. You'll have to change, though. Me? Alice asked, raising her eyebrows. What's wrong with what I'm wearing? You look exactly like the chair of the Women's Institute, Rose said, waving at Alice's white crop trousers and sleeveless floral blouse. You'll need to dress down a bit. Alice nodded and got up from the table. Then I shall do just that. Do you mind tidying away while I do? Are we going now? Miriam asked. No time at the present, Rose said, stacking their plates as Alice headed up the path to her kitchen door. We'll swing by mine and pick up my camera and a few bits. But we're not actually investigating monsters, Miriam protested. We're just finding out what's happening over there, aren't we? Well, yes, but what if there are monsters? I'd hate not to be prepared. Rose followed Alice up the path with her hands full of plates, leaving Miriam to collect the cups and saucers and milk and sugar. She just stared at it all for a moment, wondering how she'd managed to go from we shouldn't get involved to impersonating a monster hunter in the space of one conversation, then got up with a sigh. It really had looked like being a beautiful day. And that is chapter 3 of Beast Laid Plans. And now you can see why I should probably never do my own audiobooks. Man, I'm bad at that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that little sneak peek. Don't forget, chapters 1 and 2 are also over on the blog as well, and I'll link to them in this blog post. And if you would like the whole thing to arrive by the best sorts of magic or technology on your e-reader first thing tomorrow, then place your pre-order at your favourite ebook retailers. The paperback is also available for order. Obviously, that won't get there quite as instantly. But yes, that is all ready and waiting for you to discover more about the Yorkshire Beast and how it relates to the Cloverleaf Dragons. Yes, thanks so much for watching, lovely people. Thanks for reading, thanks for your support, and I really, really hope you enjoy this newest Beaufort book. And I should be back soon, hopefully speaking slightly more fluently, but probably not. Yeah, I don't hold that much hope for that. Alrighty, take care of yourselves, and yes, Happy reading and mind the beast.